Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, well, Winnipeg is done, and we have Game 7, which, I mean, the funniest thing ever. Now, hear me out. The funniest thing, if you're not a Leafs fan, would be, of course, Leafs go up 4-1, and then they blow it. Listen.
You're a mean person.
Listen. I want the record to show that's not what I'm saying I want to happen, but it would be the funniest possible outcome. And as a content man, it would be great content. That's all I'm saying. But I'm not saying I want it.
It has to be this way. That this is how it goes when you're one of those tortured teams. You need to exercise your demons in the most dramatic and climactic way possible. I mean, the most famous version of this is the Red Sox going 86 years without winning a World Series, losing to the Yankees in the single most heartbreaking Game 7 possible in 2003. The reason Aaron Boone is the Yankees manager 17 years later because of that home run. And the year after that, they go down 3-0, and they pull off the most miraculous comeback in the history of sports against their biggest rival. And then they go on to win the World Series. And I wouldn't say the Leafs' biggest rival is Florida. That's obviously the Bruins. If this were the Bruins and they had the opportunity to really exercise their demons, but this fits the bill if we're talking about the Leafs as far as exercising some demons. You come back from 3-2 down against the team that's gone to the Cup final 2 years in a row and won it one of the two times. That's something you could really feel accomplished with, and it'll be an interesting game to watch play out. And one of the real conundrums of this time of year, especially when you're on the outside looking in, is trying to draw meaningful conclusions when sometimes there aren't any to be drawn. Sometimes, you have two good teams play each other and one team just wins more of the games. That's what happened in round 1 between the Avs and the Stars. They very well could have played a best of 9 or best of 11, and I think it would have kept going back and forth. And to some extent, I do think that colors a lot of the way the Rangers, especially last year coming into this year, thought about where their team was in the pecking order. The idea that we've gotten reasonable matchups. And I was talking about this with one of the subscribers to the show who DM'd me the other day, and he goes, you know how funny it is that the Rangers, if they didn't dick around all year, very easily could have went back to the conference final with a relatively easy path, playing a Devils team without Jack Hughes and playing a Carolina team who historically they've had their number, that all the Rangers had to do was not go 5-15 for a month and a half, and they very well could have been right back in the conference finals if any adult in the room had taken any accountability at any point. And look, I know we've largely exhausted the argument about whose fault it is, which is good, being that we've spent the better part of a whole season arguing whose fault it is that they missed the playoffs this year. And naturally, the conversation has started to pivot to, well, where are they right now? Where can they go from here? What are the options? And the armchair GM stuff is always entertaining. Puckpedia is definitely getting burnt out. It's still not as good as Cap Friendly's GM tool, which was easier to use, frankly.
Right. Of course.
But as we talk about this and as we move towards the next phase, and we're 3 weeks away from the NHL draft, and the assumption is the Rangers are going to keep their pick this year because they feel confident they're going to make the playoffs next year. So if they give Pittsburgh the 18th or 19th pick, they're not particularly concerned with that. But we've got a long way to go. And I know everybody is just itching to trade Kreider, to trade Zibanejad, to trade K'Andre Miller for another restricted free agent. And the crux of today's show is going to effectively be armchair GM school. But we got to all remember the other part of this. And that's, if you trade away Zibanejad, you need to find 60 to 80 points. You trade away Kreider, you need to find 50 to 60 points. You trade away Panarin, you need to find 90 points. I know that's a popular take that's starting to bubble to some degree. The idea you trade Panarin going into his walk year, recoup a bunch of assets, and really springboard yourself with $11.5 million of cap space and all of the return you would get. The problem, of course, being the Rangers already have too many players. And that's where I want to start this conversation before you and I start going into our actual plan. Right now, the Rangers don't have a path to Brett Berard being on the opening night roster if you want to assume that Gabriel Perreault is going to slide in right away. They don't have a path to Brendan Othman being on the opening night roster right now if everybody who is here is going to be here. Because Kreider, JT Miller, Zibanejad. Okay. Lafreniere, Trocheck, Panarin. Cooley, Parsonen, who they gave a 2-year deal and a $500,000 raise to
reasons.
For no real reason.
Yeah.
Perreault, Edstrom, Carrick, Rempe. Where would you like to slide Berard in there? Where would you like to slide Othman in there? Then same deal on the back end. Everybody keeps going, well, we need a partner for Fox. Who's he pulling out of the lineup? Is Carson Sousa going to be a $3 million healthy scratch? No, we know that. So why did they give Vakanainen a 2-year deal to be the 7th or 8th defenseman? I don't know. They did it with Ben Harper, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer, which it did make me smile when I was going through the pending unrestricted free agents. And I saw that because I vividly remember thinking, why in God's name are they giving a waiver claim a 2-year contract? But thankfully, Ben Harper was mostly buried in Hartford the last 2 years. But again, they have too many players already.
And reasonably, Vakanainen could be that too. It's not out of the realm of possibility that the Rangers totally, again, for the second time in the last, 6 months, totally redo their blue line with Vakanainen if they can't find like a bidder for him. One of the ideas is that, okay, Vakanainen got that extension because he could be used in a trade / if there's nothing that incentivizes teams to take him, they could always move him down to the AHL, especially with the cap going up the way that it is. It's not the money that is the issue with Vakanainen, is why did you give him a 2-year contract in the first place? That's my bigger question. At least it wasn't for anything, super crazy, but yeah, the fact of the matter is that he's still on the roster for now and for reasons unknown, really.
And you have Zach Jones. You have Matthew Robertson, who are restricted free agents, who are also, kind of in the mix here. The Han won't be coming back because he spoke out against Commissar Drury, which you can't do because this is Madison Square Garden. You have K'Andre Miller, who needs a restricted free agent contract. And your right side is entirely locked up, and you have 2 goalies under contract for next year. As much as I agree that they need to reconfigure the roster and try and get younger and cheaper, that is a lot easier said than done. And as much as we would like to will a Zibanejad or a Kreider or both trade into existence, the hardest part of doing this exercise, what we're going to do today, trying to map out the offseason, is trying to game theory where you can conceivably send these guys to. For Zibanejad, I really was only able to come up with 4 teams that I think you could realistically convince him to take a trade to. And before we get to the blow-by-blow, Andrew and I are both going to give our differing plans and kind of walk you through our thought processes on them and kind of give real-time feedback to each other about respective plans. The other part of this that I think is the tricky part is it's one thing to just get rid of players you feel that are faulty. And I know I just said this, but I wanted to reiterate it and expand on it a little more. It's one thing to get rid of guys you feel that are deficient, Zibanejad, Kreider, if you want to say Trocheck, whomsoever, whatever you're thinking of when I say inefficient or player that's underperforming that they need to move on from, whoever you're thinking of, they do need to find a replacement for that person. And because they already have a logjam, some people might say, well, why don't you just take whatever you get? Like Arthur Staple, who thinks the Rangers should just take a second for Zibanejad. First of all, if you only get a draft pick back, you're taking a draft pick just to trade it. A second-round pick does not help the Rangers.
No.
A second-round pick next year or the year after that does not help the Rangers at all. And the last point I want to make before I throw it to you and we start walking through our plans. The Rangers are leveraged for right now. The Rangers are leveraged for right now. They don't have a first-round pick in one of the next 2 drafts. They have 1 second-round pick in the next 3 years. Other than Perreault, who, again, is a theory, not practice, they don't have anybody in the pipeline that is going to make an impact in the next 12 months. If you want to argue EJ Emery, okay, who's he playing over? Fox, right, Borgen, or Schneider? Okay. Again, we have reached the logjam impasse. And because they have such a logjam, because they don't have a clear-cut path to acquiring guys, they need to subtract. And the danger of that, of course, is it's very easy, and believe me, I'm about to try and sell you on doing it. It's very easy to say, let's trade Zibanejad for a restricted free agent or soon-to-be restricted free agent, a draft pick, and a throw-in. And in theory, yeah, Do you feel good about putting JJ Peterka or Matthias McKelly on JT Miller's right and saying, okay, make the playoffs or everyone gets fired? There are a lot of factors here. And I really want to emphasize this because as much as we all know change is necessary and we want it to happen, this is a lot easier said than done because Zibanejad has all of the leverage here. And you could try and make it difficult by trading Kreider and being like, okay, we'll get rid of all your friends. And if you want to stay here and make it miserable for yourself, go ahead. All you're doing at that point is A, souring the relationship further, and B, you're putting a player you're stuck with in an even worse position. There really isn't a win here as far as the Zibanejad situation.
I mean, I'm more inclined to believe that it's going to be a lot easier to trade Trocheck than it is to trade Zibanejad.
Oh,
like it's one of those situations where Chris Drury would love to trade Mika Zibanejad. Like that's not a secret. It's one of the Zibanejad doesn't want to move, and for he got the no move clause, so he deserves the right to say no to things. And by the way, who gave him that deal? The same guy that wants him to move out. That's Chris Drury. But at the problem becomes is that, okay, well, if Zibanejad doesn't want to go anywhere, well, you're going to have to trade a center. Vincent Trocheck had a great 2 years, great season 2 years ago. He had a miserable for, season last year. And so if you want to play Othman at that 3C or find a replacement and have him be like have Othman be like the 13th forward, I guess, which would not do well for his development at all. If anything, it'd be probably ruin it and make it worse. So here's your conundrum ultimately is, okay, let's say you trade Vincent Trocheck. Okay, what do you do? Either you trade for a winger. Like you could do the idea. One of the ideas that I was throwing around is, okay, well, you trade Kreider for high picks or whatever picks you can get, and then you trade Trocheck for a winger, and then you can use those picks in any kinds of trades. You can have Perot be that 3C if you believe in that, or if you don't, then you either trade Othman with those picks that you got from that Kreider trade, and then you bolster that top six even further. There's ideas that spin from that situation, but ultimately the number one question here that we'll soon get an answer to sooner rather than later is, what does Chris Drury see Brendan Othman as? Because you can right now you can't really play him in any of these situations in the top 9, which is where Brendan Othman needs to play consistently, by the way, if he wants to. If
drafted 4 years ago, by the way, a guy that they don't know what he is.
Right. If you want him to be an NHL player, you have to play him at this point at the NHL level. Right now, there is no space for him. So either you trade him and you let him blossom somewhere else, or you trade somebody and let him play here. Those are your two options. And Othman is essentially the key to understanding the secrets behind what the Rangers want to do this offseason.
It's, again, same thing with Brett Berard, who not as high a profile, not a first-round pick, but somebody they've spent 2 years talking up and didn't play as much this year as probably he should have down the backstretch, who doesn't have a clear path to regular NHL time, assuming Adam Edstrom is going to start next season on time. And again, that brings you back to the Rempe question of, is it worth burning a roster spot on a guy who plays 8 to 10 minutes a night and takes one penalty every single night? Again, do you want that boost you get from him playing the limited minutes he does, or would you rather give that spot to a Brett Berard or someone else? And they have a lot of moving parts, and it wouldn't be surprising if they tried to do a level up trade where you traded Othman and picks and tried to turn higher up on the food chain.
You could do Kreider and Othman, to essentially to combine those two. If Chris Drury is thinking to himself, okay, well, I don't have the space to put or incorporate Othman into this roster, but he's still young enough and has the upside that teams would be interested in him. Okay, well then Kreider and Othman for blankety blank, and then we go from there. That is another idea that could spin off of this, which is why I made the point that Othman really holds a lot of the trade secrets here as to what the Rangers want to do.
And he's one of the, and this brings us back to something else we've talked about extensively. The only pieces that are tradable are guys you don't really want to trade. You don't want to trade Otto, Cooley, Berard. You don't want to trade any of your young guys who are to what the veterans are making. So to start this conversation, I'm going to ask Andrew if he'd like to go first so we can start to get to the nuts and bolts of this episode of trying to walk through off-season plans. And we do the best we can. The math on mine checks out. I spent a lot of time on Excel, and with my TI-83, I broke the batteries out to really try and make the math work and to try and execute a vision. Now, I'm not saying this is what Chris Drury is going to do. That's a different exercise, trying to put yourself in that person's thought process. But this is what I would like the Rangers to do. Andrew, the floor is yours.
I'm gonna give it to you. You go first, and because do you want to go over Arthur Staples' vision real quick before we go into this?
I remember it off the top of my head. You replace Carson Soucy with Nick Hague, which in a vacuum is fine. I don't mind that. Hague is better than Soucy. I do think there is a conversation to have about Hague. I mentioned him in my plan as a target.
Sure.
Replacing Zibanejad with Adam Gaudette, which I found ludicrous. Replacing Chris Kreider with Brock Besser. And then what was the Vakanainen replacement?
Let's see. There is none.
There was a replacement.
Nate Schmidt. Nate
Schmidt. Which again, inoffensive. Third pair defensive.
Also, I want to highlight here. I don't, I would love to ask Arthur this myself at some point.
His trade value has always been off.
Brock Besser is going to sign here for $6 million.
Come on.
Are we really? Or seriously?
Again,
first of all, I would like Brock Besser here. Sure, that Brock Besser is a good player. He's only signing here for $6 million for 3 years,
and for 3 years, yeah. It's not math.
This won't even happen in NHL 25.
No,
let alone in real. This is not happening.
If that's what it would take, he would already be extended to be in Vancouver.
Right. Exactly. I mean, Brock Besser is not signing anywhere for $6 million a year, let alone.
You should fire your agent if you got that. I could get you a better deal than that sitting across from an NHL GM. He scored 40 goals years ago. He's a consistent 25 goal guy. With the cap going up, he's a $7.5 million player at minimum. With where we're going to be at next year, which is 95.5, which is crazy to say out loud because of where the NHL has been cap wise for the last handful of years. But 95.5, you're talking a guy who's going to score 30 goals if he plays with your best or your second best center. That's worth $7.5-8 million in the new cap environment. And that's one other thing I do want to say real quick before we start walking through. The cap of the next few years is going to be kind of jarring. Some of these numbers are going to look really wonky, but you have to remember the cap is going to go from 95 to 110 over the next 3 years. So with that in mind, some of these numbers might sound a bit crazy, but keep in mind that we're going to have actual growth, forced manufactured 1 or 2% growth. So the first thing I have written down, what path are we trying to walk? Are we trying to do what the Capitals did, the one season swing around and just get back in the playoffs? No, we're not really going to make it. Are we trying to do something along the lines of what Nashville and Pittsburgh have done, where they've tried to prolong their windows and really kind of screwed themselves in the long term in doing that? And then the last team I have written down is Minnesota, which doesn't really work in a one-to-one sense because Minnesota has Kaprizov, who's 27 and a Hart Trophy candidate, and the Rangers don't have a blue chip young guy that plays forward. If they had, if Adam Fox's impact was a forward, if he was Pasternak, this is a different conversation about reorienting the roster. But right now, their three most expensive players are Panarin, Shesterkin, and Adam Fox going into next season now. With that framework in mind, you need to replace Panarin going forward after next year because you're assuming either A, he's coming back and he's going to continue to slowly decline over the next handful of seasons, or B, you want the cap space. Rather spend that on other things, which is out of the realm of possibility. So as far as number one, they need to extend K'Andre Miller and Will Cooley. Number one, that is the most important thing as far as right now. Rough math, the Rangers have, as we here right now, about $12 million ish, with more than enough room. The only real question is, do those guys want security or do they want to bet on themselves? In Miller's case, I could see an argument for his agent telling him, let's sign a 1-year deal. Let's get a 1-year, $5.5, $6 million deal. We're going to outplay that. And next year, we are going to be 12 months away from unrestricted free agency. And either they give you term or you get traded and you go to a team that will give you term. I think that's the path if you're Miller. If you're the Rangers, this is a straight up gamble. You do not know what you're going to get from him. Most people, I know Evolving Wilds model had him at 2 years, I think 6 million, something along those lines, 6.5 million, if I remember correctly. If you wanted to play it out, I think, no, Evolving Wild has him at 5.75 for 2 years as the most likely outcome. That walks him to unrestricted free agency, and then the Rangers have to make an unequivocal decision. Either he's a player for the rest of his prime or they get rid of him. I would like the Rangers to give Cooley a 4-year deal that walks him to unrestricted free agency. He is 23 years old. You walk him to unrestricted free agency now, and you hope what you saw last year was a sign of things to come. As far as the exact cap hit I have Miller at 5.75, and I have Will Cooley at 1.95 for those two. So that comes out to about with about 2 to 3 million in space. Before we talked about making more space or getting rid of anyone, they need to sign their priority RFAs. They do have other ones. You know, they have Rempe, they have Edstrom. If you care about Kaliev, Zach Jones, they have other RFAs, but they need to sign those. They need to be on the team next year. If you want to argue, trade K'Andre Miller and try and find another defenseman, okay, but that's a different conversation.
I actually have an idea for that. Do you want to hear it now or do you want to?
Sure,
okay.
Jump in.
K'Andre Miller's such a strange player. We've talked about this so many times where, he'll have a whole game or 3 games in a row where he looks really good. And then he'll have another stretch where it's like, have you played hockey before? He, that I forget. I think it was against Calgary. That goal, the giveaway that he had in overtime, just passed it to the middle of the ice, and then they just come out and score. And that's the game. Or was it Ottawa? I forget which team that was. But for every great moment where K'Andre Miller has a great defensive play with his stick, or his skating looks really good, or maybe he's creating offensively, he has an equal moment on the ice where it looks like he doesn't know what to do, and that burns him egregiously badly. So one of the ideas that I had was, okay, you don't sign K'Andre Miller, and then you see what Chicago would like in return for Alex Vlasic. I love Alex Vlasic. I think he's first of all, he's 23. He's signed for 4.6 until 2020 for another 5 years. And he's been Chicago's best defenseman by a mile and that blue line has been awful. I think K'Andre Miller would very much benefit from a change of scenery. And if I'm the Rangers and I could get Alex Vlasic in return, oh my God, every day of the week.
I see the vision. I think you would probably need to put something with Miller to make that happen. I don't think that's a 1-for-1 trade, but that's within the realm of possibility. That's something you could talk me into. I know the other one people have thrown out is Bowen Byram. And to those people, I tell you, if you think K'Andre Miller doesn't use his body enough, you will not like Bowen Byram as a Ranger. I think Byram is a good hockey player. I think his inability to stay healthy is a real conundrum. And I think he's a little redundant with some of the skill sets they already have. And I think that's the argument for why you probably are looking at letting some of these RFAs get non-tendered. I don't think they're going to bother with Kaliev. I think he leaves. They didn't really have a plan for him. They don't really have a path to him getting playing time at the NHL level consistently. I think Edstrom and Rempe will both be extended. I think they'll both get 1 or 2 year deals, and the Rangers will punt those decisions a little further into the future. They'll get slight raises from the $800,000 they're making. The problem I have, and where this starts to become a challenge, is we've signed our 3-4 RFAs and we have $2 million in cap space left. The only way to add more is to get rid of guys. And in theory, you could convince me of the following. We are going chance there's anywhere you want to go. We're not saying we can make it happen. We're not saying we're going to do it. But we would like to get an idea of what your market value is. We would like to get an idea of what you're interested in, because you're signed until 2030 and we need to get younger. There is a trade to be made here that will help both of us. Now, I am amenable to your situation. You don't want to move your family. You don't want to move your kids. That's reasonable. At the same time, we have to run a hockey team here. So with that in mind, I have 5 teams that I think Mika Zibanejad would be willing to go to. The other 27 are all disqualified for varying reasons. I have the 7 Canadian teams as a no, just flat out. I have the 3 California teams. I have the Kraken. I have the Blackhawks. I have the Utah Hockey Club, Nashville, Chicago, the Blue Jackets, the Flyers, Penguins, the Sabres, the Red Wings. I don't think the Rangers would trade him to Carolina, the Capitals, the Devils, or the Islanders. That leaves us with the Bruins, the Panthers, the Lightning, the Golden Knights, and the Stars. With that in mind, the team I have chosen that I think makes the most sense for Zibanejad is the Vegas Golden Knights. That is a hockey team that is pretty established down the middle with Eichel, Wild Bill, Howden. It's Eichel's in a position where he's going to be a supporting cast member, get the opportunity to not have to be the best player on his own line. He gets to play with guys he has some familiarity with in William Karlsson. And he's not going to have to play center anymore. He's not going to have to be the penalty kill one center. He gets to step onto a power play that needs a trigger man. Vegas right now doesn't have a one-timer guy. That is the ideal landing spot for me. The question then becomes, what are we getting? The 2 pieces I have that are defined pieces. I have Haig, the defenseman, left-handed, and I have Alex Holtz. I have a draft pick as well, but that's just purely for a value placeholder. If there's a prospect that comes to mind, sure, whatever. The logic here being, we need a top 4 defenseman to play with Adam Fox. The problem with Haig, and more than one person has talked to me about this over the last few weeks, Vegas has been kind of desperate for him to take a leap to play with Pietrangelo. And instead, they just went out and traded for Noah Hannafin. They still have Shea Theodore. There was a path here for Nick Hague to become a first pair defenseman on a good team. And Vegas, he couldn't seize it. He could not seize that reality. This is trying to get 60 cents on the dollar for Zibanejad, and it's not a great trade. The Rangers are absolutely losing the trade on paper. They are getting a dart throw in Holtz, who probably doesn't have the path to regular playing time, and Haig, who's probably a slightly worse version of what K'Andre Miller is. But when you only have 4 or 5 teams you can trade a guy to, and Florida, Tampa Bay, they don't have the cap space really, so the Rangers would have to take something back of sizable salary, and all of Tampa's expensive players are good. They're not giving you Tony Cirelli. They're not giving you Brandon Hagel. They're not giving you any of their first line guys. So I couldn't find something that made sense there. Florida, same deal. They're going to have more cap space this upcoming offseason because they're going to lose a few more UFAs. They're not giving you Anton Lundell. Lundell might already be better than Zibanejad's value going forward. There isn't really a great trade here, but it needs to be done. For both parties, the Rangers cannot come back. And real quick, before I turn it to you for feedback, the Rangers can't come back with the same team as next year.
No, of course not.
You cannot come back.
We did also say that last year. Well, we have been hammering this for a little bit with the same core, and they have been running it back. So surely they can't do it again, right? Surely you can't. I mean, again, that was the one thing that struck me about, I forget what column it was when they hired Sullivan, was don't be surprised if the Rangers try and have Chris Kreider and Mike Sullivan work this all out. Okay. So we're really just banking on the coach fixing everything again? Again, by the way, again?
That is a really hard sell. And you have a section of the fan base that will always be happy, always defer to what the team does, whatever. For the smart fan, for the fan that's taking the time to read the news articles, to listen to the podcasts, to argue on the internet, you're having a harder and harder time convincing them that this is going in the right direction. And then the next, let me throw it back to you after that. Just a baseline, they need to turn Zibanejad into liquidity. And that's the biggest thing here. Turning Zibanejad into Holtz and Haig gives them $2.5-3 million in cap space. That plus the next trade I'm going to have is going to give them $5.5–6 million total in cap space. And that's going to put you in a position to add another middle six player that I think they desperately need.
Yeah, I mean, listen, at this point, trading Zibanejad for anybody that could play hockey at the NHL level, it would be beneficial for that to happen. I think the problem that you run into with that is kind of the same problem that Staple ran into, where, okay, well, you trade Zibanejad for picks or whatever, but even if you trade him for Holtz and Haig, how are you replacing those 60 to 80
We're going to get
points?
there. We're going to get there.
Okay. All right. We're going to get there. And I mean, like, I like Nick Hague. I think he could be somebody that is a staple top four defense before the Rangers. Again, the problem is that, okay, well, if you bring in Nick Hague, somebody has to go, which by all means, there's plenty of candidates on this blue line that need to go. Whether or not that will happen is that I'm not holding my tongue against that. I would love for that to happen. I don't think it will, because this is the same general manager that brought these people here, and I don't know if he's going to have this, come to whichever God you believe in moment that, oh wait, this blue line actually isn't good, and I messed up, and I should fix this. I don't know if that's going to happen. So, like, if you want to go to Vegas, honestly, I don't know if Vegas would even think about doing this, but would they be crazy enough to trade Tomas Hertl?
I think Hertl's injury profile worries me a little bit. That's a guy who's had a hard time staying
But that's
healthy.
why Vegas would be okay to part with somebody like that. Because again, you have to think about it this way. Zibanejad is somebody that teams know, okay, this is clearly not really working out in New York. Like, teams are very well aware of the issues going on, both on the ice and also behind the scenes between Rangers and Mika Zibanejad. Tomas Hertl is injury prone and also has 5 more years left on his deal, similarly to Mika Zibanejad.
So this is like the 2025 version of James Neal for Milan Lucic.
Yes.
We both know these are bad contracts that are going to last for another 4 or 5 years. One team is getting a little bit cheaper, and the other team is getting the guy who has less of an injury profile.
Exactly.
That's the argument.
That's the counterpoint that I would have to you is, if Hertl isn't the most healthy player and he's a little bit cheaper, maybe you could convince Vegas to do that, and maybe it's a 1-for-1 because of those contracts, because of the history between both players. I'm not saying it would happen, but it's I can see a path towards that happening.
It's a reasonable framework for a trade for the narrative reasons. I mean, I think Hertl's a better player right now. I think if you're acquiring Zibanejad, or if Zibanejad stays, I think you need to account for him playing wing going forward. I don't think you can bank on him playing center anymore, because Trocheck is more valuable for the center stuff. And you traded for JT Miller. JT Miller's a better hockey player than Zibanejad. If you want to argue Trocheck isn't better than Zibanejad, sure. But again, you saw where Laviolette's mind was at last year, and he felt that getting Zibanejad going was his biggest priority, and that's why he played Zibanejad with everybody at various points last year, because he knew they needed to get something out of him to turn their season around. And even when they did, it didn't really matter a whole lot, because he still stunk on the power play. And we keep coming back to that the Rangers added a point per game player for someone who wasn't in the lineup. Filipino was in the lineup, but he hadn't played that many games this year before getting hurt in Vancouver. And you added a point per game player, and you went 10-10-2 in the games the point per game player was on the team. You got worse on the power play. You got worse at 5-on-5, and you added a point per game player. So assuming Zibanejad goes, my next course of action is to find a landing spot for Chris Kreider. Kreider is a little bit easier because he has a 16-team list. That means
I wish we knew what those teams were, but that's
so I tried to game that out in my head. I said the 7 Canadian teams: Utah, Chicago, Anaheim, San Jose, LA, Nashville, Detroit, the Kraken, and the Islanders.
Right. Essentially the bad teams you won't go.
The bad teams, and then I don't think the Rangers would trade him in the Metro.
No.
And that leaves a very similar crop of teams to what we just said for Zibanejad: Boston, Tampa Bay, Florida, Vegas, Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota. Now, this one The Rangers are going to need to put something with Chris Kreider to make this trade happen because the player they are targeting has a ton of upside, but doesn't have a huge track record. Now, there are going to be people who hear this name and say, that guy? And not realize the season he just had. I would like the Rangers to trade Chris Kreider and the only second-round pick they have for the next 3 years to the Minnesota Wild for Marco Rossi. Marco Rossi is not a Chris Drury hockey guy. He is small. He is European. He plays with a finesse style of hockey. This is not something Chris Drury would do. This is not something Chris Drury would consider doing. Marco Rossi is a building block. He is 23 years old. He's Lafreniere's draft class. He's that year. He's 2020. He has had a hellacious path to get to the NHL, took basically a whole year away from hockey to get healthy after dealing with long COVID. Had his first really good NHL season this year as a member of the Wild. Now, why would the Wild do this? Number one, they want experience. They want veterans. Number two, Bill Guerin loves him some USA hockey guys. Number three, you get to put Kreider back with Matt Zuccarello.
Yeah.
Number four, you get to put Chris Kreider in the hockey organization Derek Stepan works for. Number five, the Rangers need to get younger and cheaper very badly. Very, very badly. They are banking currently on all of future slack being picked up by Perreault, Othman, Berard, Will Cooley, EJ Emery, and K'Andre Miller maybe if he's on the team. That is not enough. It is objectively not enough. Rossi needs an RFA extension, though. He is an RFA this summer. And that's the other reason, because you don't know what his asking price is going to be if you're the Wild. And he doesn't have the most straightforward path to regular playing time in Minnesota, which is why I think it's not insane to consider they would trade him. Now, Kreider's older. He's more expensive. He only has 2 years left on his contract. He very well might retire after those 2 years. The other part, and the other reason Minnesota could consider this, at least as a rough outline, they need to win a playoff series. All they need to do is win a playoff series. Chris Kreider can win you a playoff series. We've seen it. Chris Kreider can be a determining factor. Carolina. Chris Kreider can be a determining factor in a playoff series. He doesn't need to be the best player on his own line. He rides shotgun with someone else who's better than him. He takes up a lot of space. He kills penalties. He can bolster your penalty kill. It's a rough framework. I think the Rangers probably need to add something else, in all honesty, because Rossi has a lot of value because he's only 23. And if he pops, has the potential to be a low-end first-line center. Like he could be a weaker, like in a B- version of what Nick Suzuki is. And Nick Suzuki's a really good hockey player.
See, I like that a lot. I mean, I really like Nico Rossi as a player. I mean, I think he's somebody that can bring a ton of upside to the top six. I don't know if Minnesota would want Kreider for Rossi is the problem. Like the only hang up that I have is Bill Guerin, talking to Drury and being like, okay, like, we can make something of this happen, but we're going to need something more substantial than just Kreider and, like, let's say a second round pick or something of that ilk. Because again, like the Minnesota Wild, as you alluded to, are desperate. And Chris Kreider, as we saw this regular season, was not the Chris Kreider that scored 52 goals a couple of years ago. No. So for the Wild were a fringe playoff team to begin with this past season. So the idea is that, okay, well, if you're going to trade us Kreider for Rossi, we're going to need more to accompany this deal, because at least on paper, the Wild become a worse team after this trade. Now they could get the second round pick and turn it into somebody else. Like, yeah, like that can happen down the road. Sure. But off the rip, I would have to think that if the Wild are actually going to consider this, they would have to ask for an Othman, a Berard, like even maybe if I was Drury, I would say no to this, but even a Will Cooley, like I would imagine they value Rossi pretty high. And I don't think Kreider in a second is going to get that done. But I can see a world in which a conversation could be had.
That's the one other thing I wanted to mention as far as like my framework, my ideas here. The Rangers need to get more dynamic. They need to get more explosive. They need to get more creative. They have good playmakers. I would venture to say they have too many playmakers and not enough finishers. But they need more guys who are capable of making flashy plays, making splash plays, if you will. You know, the type of guys who can operate outside of structure and really make things happen for themselves. Because other than Panarin, they don't have a guy who can do that. Like, as good as JT Miller is at hockey, I wouldn't classify any of his traits as elite. He's really good at pretty much everything. He's not the best shooter. He's not the best skater. He's not the best hitter. He's not the best face-off guy. He's not the best facilitator, net front. He's really good at most aspects of hockey. That's a problem the Rangers have fundamentally failed to address basically my entire life. You know, they have always gone into a playoff series at a certain point of the playoffs where the other team just has a better guy. And Marco Rossi very clearly isn't, you know, a Kaprizov. He's not that tier of player. But they need guys who can make things happen. And the Rangers don't have enough of that. Like, as much as I like Will Cooley, he's not a dynamic skater. He's not an explosive player who makes things happen in the same way that the really elite players in the league do. And even Panarin hasn't had as much. He didn't have that this year. 2 years ago, yes, when he was a Hart Trophy finalist for sure. But they need to get more explosive. They need to get more dynamic. The next part sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have for Mike Kreider, I have two. One is the low hanging fruit, and the other one, which is probably more realistic. My first one is, of course, because this is the hill I'm dying on forever, the Rangers trade Chris Kreider and also Matthew Robertson of the St. Louis Blues for Pavel Buchnevich. Hear me out.
Obviously, you don't have to convince me. I'll drive Kreider to St. Louis and I'll pick Buchnevich up.
My low, like, this is, of course, because, you know, I love how Buchnevich, I think, is a great hockey player. I also think he would be a phenomenal player under Mike Sullivan. I think, if nothing else, like, you know, for those Rangers fans that are not convinced of Pavel Buchnevich in his entirety, you know, of his career, I think he would be great under Mike Sullivan's system. And I think, like, that world, like, he's a great player in and of himself, but also under that system that Mike Sullivan employs, I think Buchnevich would be great. Also, Matthew Robertson's 24. He's, at this point, not going to play in a Rangers uniform, given the gestures wildly at what's going on with the blue line currently. And the Blues need defensemen. Krug is done. Suter's done. And they need another cheapish, well, cheap because he hasn't played in the NHL yet, cheap, you know, prove it defenseman to see if he can play. And I think the St. Louis Blues would at least consider that. My more realistic trade is see what Edmonton wants for Zach Hyman. Because, and I say this because the idea is that there's a like, Mitch Marner is gone from Toronto, 100,000%. He's gone. If he goes to Edmonton, or if he wants to go to Edmonton, they're going to have to clear cap space to make that happen. Now, Kreider is more expensive than Hyman, sure, but the idea is that you trade Kreider 50% retained for Zach Hyman, make that happen, and then, you know, you add picks and prospects and go from there, whatever, if Edmonton wants to do that. But again, I don't know how real that, like, a lot of that hinges on what Mitch Marner wants to do, if he even wants to go to Edmonton, or if he's done with Canada in its entirety and wants to go to a place that doesn't have the spotlight on him at all times of the day and night. Then, you know, that kind of falls through. But the idea is that if Edmonton needs to clear cap space to bring in somebody like of that caliber, that is something that could possibly happen.
Okay, number one, Hyman's a better player than Kreider. That's the first part of this. Number two, I don't think it's implausible that you could make something in that framework work. I think the Rangers would need to attach more.
Yeah.
Number two, I think that would also be incumbent upon Edmonton really wanting to make a big play. The other part you have to consider, Draisaitl's extension kicks in next year. Bouchard needs an extension.
Sure.
And McDavid is 2 years away. So getting cheaper in the short term does help them. The Kreider being off the books when the McDavid extension would go to kick in helps. But I don't think Kreider really gives them anything. Like, I hate saying this because, like, it's immoral, but, like, Evander Kane gives them what Chris Kreider would give them on some level. Like Evander Kane plays the way we kind of wish Kreider would at points, where just drive to the net, hit anything that moves, and be a miserable asshole the way that Evander Kane actually is and wants to be. So with that in mind, I don't think it's impossible. I think Edmonton is a team I could see trading for Chris Kreider because Stan Bowman cares about those types of things, the intangibles.
Also, Kreider, one of the best net front players in the entire league, and like Edmonton has Corey Perry to do that, sure, but adding Kreider to an already deadly power play up there in Edmonton would be pretty scary to play against.
It gives them something in terms of size that they might need up front. I think the big question and the big problem in doing these exercises is trying to find landing spots the guys will agree to get traded to.
Yeah.
Because when you assume all 7 Canadian teams are off limits, the 3 California teams, you're already at 10. Seattle's 11. Utah's 12. You don't want to go to Chicago or Columbus. That's 14. You're almost at half the league, and that was 4 seconds of speaking. It's really hard when you can only trade guys to 4 or 5 places because they're not going to trade these guys in the division. They don't want to see Kreider or Zibanejad 4 or 5 times a year or in the first or second round of the playoffs. It becomes really difficult to find these landing spots. The other thing I have written down here, and this is one that I have seen other people suggest, and I would like the Rangers to make one priority free agent signing on July 1st. I would like the Rangers to sign Matt Duchene to effectively be the Mika Zibanejad facsimile. He is not going to create the offense himself. He is entirely line mate dependent. But the last 2 years in Dallas have shown you, if you put him next to better hockey players, he will do enough to put up the counting stats. He can't take Zibanejad's spot on the power play. He can't take Kreider's. He doesn't have a one-timer. He's not a net front guy. But you put him opposite JT Miller, you put him opposite Panarin, he'll give you 50 points. And that's what they need. Duchene's in his mid-30s. He's already made a lot of money. He's been willing to take less to stay in Dallas. But now the assumption is he's going to want to get a little bit more on this next deal. I am saying 2 years at $5.25, and that puts the Rangers at like $900,000, $1 million left after trading Kreider and Zibanejad, effectively using all of our cap on giving Haig a contract because he's a restricted free agent, getting Duchene on the first day of free agency. I don't think they're going to be able to afford Brock Besser. I don't think they're going to be able to afford Mitch Marner. I don't think they'll be able to afford Gavrikov, in all honesty. No. And I know people are very bullish on the idea of Gavrikov. I know he doesn't put up a lot of points, but I think we have to remember that cap space is going up and people are going to have money to burn. There are a lot of teams out there that are going to be spending like the world is ending on the first day of free agency.
I think the only way that happens is if the Stars don't want Duchene back.
Yeah.
Because Matt Duchene loves Dallas. He's been very vocal, like going out of his way to talk about how much he loves being in the city, how much he loves every aspect of being a Dallas Star. Like it's one thing for a player on a team to say how much he likes the city and whatever, but Duchene really drives that point home that he really likes it there. So the only way I see Duchene leaving is if Jim Nill says we're moving in a different direction, then in which case maybe that's a possibility. I guess the counterpoint to that I would throw at you is Brock Nelson.
I have him written down. It's not impossible, but I think if you do that, I think you're playing JT Miller on the wing. Because I think for the contract, you're going to have to pay Brock Nelson. I don't think he's going to get anything crazy, but he's going to get enough where it's not going to be justifiable to play him as the third line center. It's the same reason they're not playing Zibanejad as the third line center. And I don't think you're going to play Brock Nelson on the wing. I don't hate the idea of Brock Nelson.
He made $6 million, his last contract. I mean, he's 30. He's going to be 34 coming up here. I don't know how much more he's going to ask, especially with the cap going up. Again, we're not jury, nor are we in the room, so it's a little bit difficult to predict what Brock Nelson might ask on July 1st. That's an impossible task for anybody involved. But I don't think he's going to ask for 13 million, 10, 11, 12 million dollars. So like there's a conversation to be had. Again, I don't know how. I think Brock Nelson adds a skill that the Rangers right now are kind of lacking in. I like the way he drives to the net, and something that Mika Zibanejad doesn't do too much of. And if you can get Zibanejad off this team and add Brock Nelson as a July 1st free agent, depending on the contract, that's a welcome change, I think.
Nelson gives them something they don't have. That's fair. He's somebody who can consistently score 25 to 30 goals. He can be the second best player on a decent line. I think if you were to play him next to Panarin, or if you were to kick Miller out to the wing, I think you would get reasonably good production out of him. And then the last thing I have written down here, if you can't make the Rossi swing happen, the other two names I have written down are Matthias Micheli and JJ Peterka. Micheli is a dart at this point. He was pretty good 2 years ago. Last year, he didn't show Utah a whole lot. He's got 1 year left of team control. That's the type of skill set. The Rangers need guys with upside. And we have talked about this extensively over the last 2 years, the idea that it's not enough to just have good players. Those guys need to have room as far as their range of outcomes, where the floor can be high. That's fine. You know, that's why you keep veterans around. But you need guys who can elevate, who can get better, to give yourself room to improve as the season goes along, because that's the key. One of the keys to being a team that can go on to win the Stanley Cup is that you keep getting better as the season goes along. So you start to peak and you keep getting better round after round after round, because the team you play is just going to keep getting better round after round. And it's hard to do that when your guys are 31, 32, 33, 34 years old. It's hard to keep improving or to find new wrinkles, you know, to teach an old dog new tricks. That's one of the keys for this offseason. Is there a world where they just say, fuck it, we go get Gavrikov day one, he plays with Fox. They say, we were wrong. They give Soucy away for like a 4th or 5th round pick, eat the L, and they try and find a trade for one of Kreider or Zibanejad or both. Yeah, I think realistically, they probably trade Kreider. They try and make the Zibanejad thing work, and we're having the same Zibanejad conversation next year at this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see that as well. I love JJ Peterka and I love Michelli. Those are two guys that would be great in a Rangers uniform. I mean, those guys, especially, but like Michelli brings a lot of speed.
Yeah.
Michelli would immediately become the fastest skater on the Rangers, and that is something that they desperately need. There's a lot of skill on this team, and speed isn't everything. Of course it's not, but there are situations and there are moments within a game where you need your player to win a straight line race, and Michelli can do that against most players in the NHL. I mean, my man's like, he's got the speed for days. I really like, and also his NHL skill set's good. Like you said, a couple of years ago, he was really shaping out to be somebody for Utah, and this past season hasn't really gotten his way. But I do think in a fresh environment, Michelli would be a dynamic player, and I really like him as well. I mean, Peterka, same thing. Peterka was dominant for Buffalo, a team that was going nowhere again for the 16th year in a row. Buffalo Sabres have not made the playoffs, and I mean, JJ Peterka was allegedly almost a Ranger at the deadline, so this would be a match made in heaven, if you will. And yeah, I'm kind of worried as to what the extra details for a Peterka trade would be, just because I think Buffalo is a lot higher on JJ than Utah would probably be on Michelli. But JJ in a Rangers uniform would move me. I'll tell you that.
The Rangers need to get younger. They need to get more dynamic. They need to get more explosive. It is one thing to say we need to be harder to play against. Sure. You need to have a certain baseline level of talent for that type of stuff to matter. You know, it's one thing to say we need to be more difficult to play against. We need to be more rugged. There is a pragmatic way of doing that. You look at the way Edmonton put together that Evander Kane, Nugent Hopkins, Zach Hyman line for most of that King series and the start of the Vegas series, where all those guys do is dump the puck below the goal line, forecheck as hard as humanly possible, and create plays down in the phone booth, down around the net front. The Rangers don't have guys who do that. Will Cooley is really it. Until you get more guys who can do that, until you get more guys who have a move they can execute in a 2-on-1 or on a breakaway that doesn't result in the puck hitting the glass, You know, I still can't believe, and it's so burned into my brain how Trocheck laid that pass off on that 2-on-0, where it was him, the goalie, and I forget who he laid it off to. I want to say Lafreniere. Lafreniere didn't get a shot off because they waited too long. The Rangers don't have any drivers. They don't have anyone on this team who says, I'll do it. You know, when you look around at the teams that go on and win consistently, they have guys who make it happen. You know, you and I have been very, very high on the Dallas Stars over the years. Their young crop of guys, whether it's Johnston, Hintz, Robertson, the way they've integrated those guys alongside the old guard, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, even they looked around and said, I think we need one more guy. We need a guy who can win games by himself sometime. And the problem, of course, is there's maybe 15 of them in the entire league. And that's being generous to say 15. It might only be 10. Right. Until you can get a Mikko Rantanen, an Austin Matthews, a Nathan McKinnon, a Connor McDavid, a Leon Draisaitl, a Cale Makar. If you don't have one of those 10 guys, 15 guys, you can't have any weak links in your lineup because they get picked apart. Hockey is a weak link sport where if you consistently have weak players out there, and they don't even have to necessarily be bad, I'm just saying worse than what the other team has, that's where you run into issues, and that's frankly where the Rangers are. The Rangers roster isn't awful. It's very congested. They need to create room for guys to play, let alone cap space. That's my biggest priority. They need to clear this logjam of players, and they need to make some definitive decisions as far as Edstrom, Rempe, Parsonen. I can't believe I have to add Parsonen to the sentence, but like, you're giving a guy a 2-year deal. You gave him a $500,000 raise when he would have been lucky to get a qualifying offer. He needs to be a 75-game third-line center next year, or he needs to be a trade chip.
Yeah.
If he plays 35 games and you have him under contract for one more year, well, we're going to give him a chance to win the 3C job at training camp in the fall of 2026. That doesn't help anyone.
No.
You wasted a year. And that's really the last thing I wanted to hit on. And you brought this up and it made me think about it. The idea that Drury tried to fix the defense on the fly. You know, they brought in Vakanainen, Duchene, Susi, and Borgen, of course. And they stopped the bleeding.
Did they?
They stopped the bleeding relative to what they were doing during the 5-15 run. But they didn't actually get the follow-up. You know, like when you go to like urgent care and you get help for whatever's bothering you, and they're like, yeah, go to your primary, go get tested for X, Y, or Z. And they never went up and got the test. They never got the follow-up. So they never got a corrective course of treatment. They just kept leaking bullet from their bullet holes every few weeks and going, ow, that hurts. And never went and got it fixed. They never got the bullet hole stitched up. You look at this defense. Where is there room for someone to come in? Where is EJ Emery supposed to play a year from now if he's actually going to be what they think he is? Are you going to trade Braden Schneider 5 years after you probably should have? Are you going to trade Will Borgen, who has no trade protection? And we know they're not going to trade Adam Fox, because if they do, we're going to make January 6th look like a picnic. But at a certain point, where is there room for improvement without getting rid of guys?
Somebody please clip that. That's what's...
Without getting rid of guys, there's no way to improve the team. Don't tell me Mike Sullivan's going to fix everything, because look, I think Mike Sullivan's a good coach, and I don't think everything over the last few years is an indictment of him in Pittsburgh. But if he was that good of a coach, he could have figured something out to make the fucking playoffs with 5 Hall of Famers on his team. Like, at a certain point, if he's that good, like, I know, he had Jeff Carter and Matt Nieto and Kevin Hayes and all of these guys who are empty nothings. Okay. He still has Crosby. He still has Malkin. Last year, he had Jake Gensel, Letang, and Erik Karlsson. He couldn't figure something out to be passable. The Kraken won a playoff series 2 years ago where their best player was a rookie, Matty Beniers. If you're that good, you should be able to figure something out and stop worrying about the short-term solutions, because all they're doing is making longer-term problems. Because now you're stuck with Will Borgen. Now you have to play Susi for a year, because we know Drury's not going to swallow his pride and get rid of Susi, barring something weird happening. It's a really unfortunate place to be in, because without getting rid of guys, they can't get better. The only guys you want to get rid of can't be gotten rid of. And the guys you don't want to get rid of can be gotten rid of. It is a really difficult line to walk this summer. And I really don't know what to expect.
I think, and the last real name on my list, too, that I wanted to highlight here is somebody that you could trade Kreider for, you could trade Miller for, you could trade maybe even Trocheck for, I guess, if you wanted to, is Mikey Anderson from the LA Kings.
Yeah.
He's 25, and the LA Kings, again, they not only lose in the first round, Rob Blake is out. Like they right now, like they don't know what to do. And this is really a good opportunity for the Rangers to come in and swoop in and really take Mikey Anderson while he's got 6 more years left at $4.1 million, and he could be a top 4, even a pair, like a top 2 with Fox pair. Like there's multiple different avenues you can go as to how you get that trade done, and I would imagine LA would want more than just a player. Maybe you give them Matthew Robertson or maybe even EJ Emery because of the logjam that you have at the blue line. Mikey Anderson is somebody that would make this blue line so much better than it currently is, and if you play him with Adam Fox, actually gives him a good partner. So whatever avenue because there's a lot of different ways you could go about it, but Mikey Anderson in a Rangers uniform would really make this team better immediately.
That's the type of piece they need. And again, the other point we do need to emphasize here before we sign off, all of these moves are basically just to get the Rangers back to the playoffs. None of these moves make the Rangers Stanley Cup caliber good. And I do think everybody needs to calibrate their expectations and their frame of reference going forward around the idea the window's closed. I'm not saying it's, impossible. I'm saying we're talking like a 1 or 2% outcome that they are capable of winning the Stanley Cup next year. 2 or 3 years from now, that's a different conversation. You have the opportunity 2 summers from now to get, 30-year-old Eichel, 30-year-old McDavid, whatever. We can have a different conversation then because we'll have more information then.
Right.
But for right now, it does not feel like there is a move to be made to get them back to Stanley Cup contention. Playoffs, yes. Win a round or 2, sure. They're not beating Florida. They're probably not beating Tampa Bay. They're probably not beating whatever the next group is. And there will be another group that comes to this table in the next year or 2.
And, doing this exercise, people have to understand, too, that the Drury isn't going to tear this team down.
No.
He is not going to sell and accumulate draft picks and prospects and things of that nature, such as, what as Stephen A likes to say. But he is under immense pressure to bring this team back to the playoffs. We've talked about this before. This is, he got that extension, but the reporting is that if they don't make the playoffs, Dolan will eat the money and find a different general manager. So Chris Drury is under a lot of pressure right now to deliver a team that will at least get there and not only get there, but not embarrass themselves while doing it, So the idea that, okay, so you trade Panarin for, I'm just making things up, a first-round pick and this prospect and whatever, and then you trade Kreider for a prospect and you do all that. Like, yeah, in a vacuum, you could. There's a theory, a process that if you can sort of retool on the fly. Trade a bunch of these guys for either high prospects or, maybe get a bunch of picks and then use that to trade for a top 6 player, what have you. Drury's not doing that. He has got 1 year to show Dolan that he can fix this problem. Because if not, he's out. They are doing everything they can to make the playoffs this season. And, there's not going to be any massive surprises. I wouldn't think, but the Rangers have to make the playoffs if Drury wants to stay at his current job. So no selling will be had unless it's unless we get to March and the Rangers are 20 points out of a playoff spot, in which case we have bigger problems. But Drury needs to make the playoffs. He knows he needs to make the playoffs, and that is the route that they will take. Whether or not that's the best one, we can argue that, but that is the path that they will be going down.
Yeah, everything about the way they've handled the last year and a half or so would lead you to believe they think they're close. I mean, trading for JT Miller when they did, Susi, Vakanainen, Borgen, they thought they were going to fix the mistakes after going 5-15 and kind of backdoor their way in. And if we get in, anything can happen their way to being good again. But as last season showed you, you actually do need to play hockey at some point if you would like to make the playoffs. And Correct. It was really hard for them to come by good stretches of hockey other than the 2 games Calvin DeHaan played as a Ranger. That will do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. Andrew and I will talk to you guys real soon. Until then, enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs and go Knicks.
Later.